The views and opinions expressed in these historical letters that may contain vernacular used in the World War II era, the post-war era, and the Cold War era do not reflect the views and opinions of any of the individuals involved with this project, including, but not limited to, the podcast's creators. Good morning, Jamie. I do have my coffee, and you've got the little cat is gone.
The little cat, I couldn't get the little cat on. Yeah, I need to get another one.
Okay.
Find him or
But
something.
still, leopard print.
I got my leopard print.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. So, Sweetie's in Kansas now.
Sweetie has left Ottumwa, Iowa to be with her man.
Yep. But now she's in Kansas. They're currently living in this little one-room residence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're making do. He was transferred to Naval Air Station NAS Hutchinson, Lou was. And this is where we find ourselves at the end of July of 1944. That being said, we're not going to exactly lose at all times what's going on in Iowa. For those of our listeners who are like, oh no, we're in Kansas, like, how are we going to get the scoop of what's going on in Iowa that we're so used to listening to? Never fear. Chester is here.
The good doctor has returned.
A good doctor has returned today. So if you're a fan of Chester and you're like, oh, I hope we get to a Dr. Demaree letter.
I am a fan of Chester.
Yeah, this is going to be the feature of this episode, is what's going on in Iowa. Now, we have 3 letters today. We are going to catch up with Sweetie in Hutchinson, Kansas in the later portion of this episode, but we have a very long letter from Chester to go through that's very, very interesting and details a lot of things going on back in his hometown of Lacona in 1944 in July. And we've got a lot of special content here. So we're about to dive into the letters. Before we do that, just a reminder to everybody, please check out the website at www.lovesweetiepodcast.com. It's been updated with the diagram. There's now an album called Sweetie in Kansas. So you can go in and you can see the diagram that she draws herself when she tells her family about where she's living in that little one-room residence that she and Lou have. The pictures of the artifacts and items from Ottumwa have been moved into a new album called Sweetie in Ottumwa. So if you're going back through those episodes and you want to see some of the photos and things that are associated with that, you can just go to the website, go to the photo albums, and choose which one you'd like to look at. So we've still got the artifacts album. It's now going to be filled up with some new items that are coming in, so we can see those. And then, yeah, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube, please leave comments. You know, we appreciate the interaction with everybody who's enjoying the podcast. And Spotify, Apple Podcasts, if you can leave a review, we very much appreciate that. But we're going to dive into the episode today, and we're going to start with the good Dr. Demaree.
Lieutenant Frank E. Demaree, Signal Office, 7th Fighter Command, APO 958, care of Postmaster, San Francisco, California. Dear Francois, it has been some time since we have written you. It seems we have had too many things to contend with, all told, and have put off writing. I hope to be able to make up for it with this letter. I will first state that before we received your request for a ballot, that we had already signed an application for the ballot to be sent to you. We sensed that you would not have a ballot unless we helped you, so we decided that it was better that an application for it was made in time. Yes, we anticipate you have some interesting times discussing politics with Maida. Last fall, when she was here, she stated that her father did not understand why the British did not let the Germans alone. And though I may be mistaken, I anticipated that statement carried several other implications with it, such as some differences in political ideas with which I am already familiar. I have already had Bob's application sent too, and hope that he will receive the ballot in due time. Your last letter and Bob's came the same week. He requested that I send him 2 gross of azo paper and some developer, and I got it off a few days afterwards. The allowance for such a quest package was £5, and I had the weight cut down to the minimum and just exactly £5. I think that I paid 48 cents for postage. I had packed it pretty secure, and I think that he will be able to receive it in first-class condition. It will be his birthday present. What would you like for us to send you for August 24th?
Okay.
Yes. And this is a great place to stop because so we're talking about first, we have to call attention that these boys are overseas and there's an election coming up.
Yep.
And so they were, and I'm really glad that Chester and Laura were making sure that their boys could get their ballots in.
Yep. Yeah. The absentee ballots, they're making sure that they vote. This is very, very important. And we're going to get to this again at the end of the letter. This is very, very important to Chester. Chester's concerned about politics. He's not telling, we can notice he's not telling Frank and Bob who they have to vote for, but they have to vote.
They have to vote.
And so he's like, let me help you along here. It's actually, I think it's sort of reminiscent of him wanting Frank to join the Masons. Yeah. Let me get this application together for you. You know, you're going to do your civic duty and vote. And I find it so interesting that this is one of the bigger letters that we see a little bit more of Chester's political side. And when this episode's going to air, it's going to be 9 days before the election of 2024. These are the applications going in for the ballots for the election in the fall of 44. So we get this 80-year divide. But today I think everybody's really thinking about the presidential election. And 80 years earlier, Chester's thinking about it then. So we have this really interesting parallel going on.
While Florence and KM were here, we took several pictures of her, and I think that with some improvements in developing facilities and the cool weather we've been having, that I will be able to send you some of the pictures that I've been promising you for some time. We have been fairly busy, and this has kept us from getting many things done that we wanted to do. I will close here, as we have an emergency case coming in just now, 8:45 p.m. Our time is not our own. A small boy was brought in who had paraphimosis, infection of the foreskin. The parents' remarks were, "I've never seen the likes of that before." It took general anesthetic, some sweating, and of course some skill to reduce the gigantic deformity. I feel that 10 ducats was not enough to charge. I had one last spring, which total charges amounted to $58 at the hospital. And considering that they both came in at that time of night, both dressed in their Sunday best, giving me light credit for possibly restoring things to normal, I feel the amount is allowing them off reasonable enough. Do I hear Bob stating I'd charge $35 anyway? However, 10 in the patty is worth $25 in the bush of uncertainty.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So Chester has been very busy.
Yeah.
I can kind of understand why.
Yeah.
But let's call attention to the dollar amounts of things. So $58 at the hospital, he said, for
basically the surgery case? Yeah, for something similar.
Geez, that's a lot.
Yep.
And then so he's like, but I really do. Chester's like, 10 would be enough. I'm going to just charge 10.
Yeah.
This was, this is something, I really appreciate how he really thinks about the members of his community and like, what they can afford and stuff. And we're getting a little insight to Bob too. Bob would be like, I charge him $35 anyway.
Yeah.
So we don't know too much about Bob, so it's kind of fun to hear something that about Bob's personality.
Yeah.
But that it just made me very sad too when he said our time is not our own. Because he is the only doctor in town, right?
He is the only doctor in town. Can you imagine going to a town doctor and getting a surgery performed in town and not having to go to the hospital to get it taken care of? Something at this level. I can't imagine that would happen today. Very rarely you go to the hospital for this kind of a thing, and there would be a lot going on. It's Chester and Laura, and that's it, and they're handling it. The $10 thing is so interesting as well, that he's so compassionate towards the people of town that that's all he's going to charge. And it goes back to that previous note from Gene that we'd read in a previous episode, that during the Depression, he charged $1 for the office visits to make sure that everybody was taken care of. So this is another indication of that. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine today. this being done, just go into the doctor's office and, you know, one stop and done. So I'm sure the parents were grateful.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
While KM is not here, and while the weather is relatively cooler, I have been improving my equipment. I have made a wooden tray for a scale that I purchased for weighing babies. All but made a carrying case for my obstetrical outfit. I could not purchase a proper size receptacle for this purpose, and sufficient to carry everything I needed for my work. I have else constructed one of these small tanks that I must have to facilitate development of the Graflex outfilms. Have underway about half a dozen other projects, several of them started, and most of the materials are collected for them all.
I would just like to ask if any of these other projects involve the chairs that Laura would like made.
You read my mind.
Right? Who knows if we're ever going to see those chairs made. The Great Flex is...
I have lost hope at this point.
I don't think so. I think Laura has at this point.
But
too.
I'm still going to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every time he's doing a project, I'll be like, chairs, please.
How are those chairs coming along, sir?
Right. Mm-hmm. And then the Great Flex. So this is the camera of the time. So he's talking about constructing the tanks for the development of the film. This is his photography passion here coming in.
About 3 weeks ago, when we were getting ready to go to the woods for an afternoon recreation, a couple of youths appeared at the door and requested me to come at once, as they are trying to get Alfred Watcher out of the creek down by the John Dittnern Bridge, and we want you there to help take care of him. This did not sound well for the prospects of a young soldat just home on furlough the night before from his command in California. I got my grip and a bottle of epinephrine and went east over 4 miles of winding road at about 50 miles over some of it. At times I was quite apprehensive and glad enough when we got there, but only to find Albert lying prone at the edge of the pool, being administered by some inexperienced companions. I must state that I felt about 1/1000th of hope that anything could be done for him. I started in with artificial respiration, and after 10 minutes, being relieved by Priest Meyer, long enough to give an intravenous of the Lee epinephrine, and later repeated again after another 10 minutes. It was a grueling workout, but I had not overeaten of dinner, and after my second wind began, I made out fine in the still afternoon heat. Much better, in fact, than young Priest Meyer, who had worked about 1/3 of relieving me and devoting the other part of time directing the crowd that had gathered 3 deep on the overlooking bank, partaking in Hail Mary for 2 courses. The droning away continued for about an hour. I forgot part of my misery by following the inclinations and thinking. Some were high, strident, some were low as a bumblebee, and made the sound like a swarm of bees, as it were. There grew up between the priest and myself a tacit realization that our efforts were futile. He suggested that we just as well quit. However, I held out for a minimum of 2 hours and kept at it on that score. The spiritual administrations took on a corresponding outlook, for Albert's baggage was being packed and labeled accordingly. Virtues and attainments were listed and commended, and he was commended and recommended to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. It was a sad and sorrowful moment, especially while the widowed mama, laid out of a mental hospital in anguish, besought and requested other medical skill or methods, but to no avail. We brought him up and laid him at the edge of the cornfield to wait the inquest of the medical examiner of Warren County. In diving, Albert had struck a submerged snag out of sight and was stunned and drowned. His name was Watcher, of all things, but he had not watched. Within a week later, we took the mama to the hospital for a gallbladder operation. We think she is standing all of her burdens just fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt Chester here because he's given the whole narrative of what happened, and it's difficult to pause in the middle of that. But
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very upsetting, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think about this, and of course, like the part that his mother was there and just was begging for somebody else to try something. That just
right.
It's such a horrible thing to think about. He was on his vacation,
Right.
from California. He was like on leave from
Day
California.
back, yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't going back. So yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah. And what I find amazing here is, Chester has this amazing narrative. Every now he's very direct in a lot of sections. But when he gets to a narrative and he paints the scene, he really does paint the scene, that this boy had dove in and hit his head or something. He's drowning and the other guys pull him out. They run to get the doctor, and the doctor comes at 50 miles an hour, through these, what we can anticipate are not paved roads to get over there.
Ruts, like
here
dirt.
Comes,
yeah, not easy to go fast on.
Right. Here comes the priest. And Chester writes, he's basically administering CPR for 2 hours. Like 2 hours is a long time, right? For him to say, okay, they know it's futile, but they're just going to keep going. And the crowd is building up and the mother is there and all of these things are happening. And he just keeps going. And he talks about the rumble of the bees, right? He's just sort of describing like how it sounds for him as he's trying to no avail, that it becomes futile. He's realizing he's still trying to continue to save this individual's life, who at the end of this, we have the notice from the paper in Des Moines. It is Alfred Wachter is the name here, because he calls him Albert at a different point. He's making some typing errors as he's writing this. And it's actually interesting that we see so many typing errors on the previous slide for the people that are listening audio only. And I think that's because he's emotional as he's writing it. He's making mistakes as he's typing this letter up and telling Frank what had happened. The phrase that he writes here where he says that, while this is going through, the priest is going into the mode to console the gathered crowd, the mother, that he was commended and recommended to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, that just the phrasing that he gives. And then at the very, very end, they laid him at the edge of the cornfield. And we just get this, moment of someone passing. So absolutely a true story. We have the article. The article in the paper is very short. It's not Chester's narrative of exactly what happened here, of course. But to have the history of what happened here and then the attempts to save a life, is really...
and I'm sure that this is something, too, that if his boys are out there fighting, that they're also having to deal with.
Yeah. So we'll go on from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace.
Okay.
As referred to above, KM spent quite a while with us, remained long enough that we could note changes in her. She is not wiry, she's a steel spring. She regurgitated so much that I called her milksop to her face. Seems to have enough of something back of her to ensure a positive absence of bad looks. You cannot help liking her, and in case of dire necessity, we feel it coming up in us to see her through. There is not much left for us to worry about. More later as time goes on. Florence seems interested in the bees. It would make my hair stand on end to have Bob evinced as much in the days appropriate for such interest. To plague hell out of him, I will have to give them a colony when he gets home. Our bees have done fairly well. One colony has capped over 120 pounds of the Joyce's sweet clover. 2 more colonies will produce a corresponding amount.
So on to happier things. He sort of moves the letter away from this unfortunate passing away, the death of Alfred Wachter, and he starts to talk about his little granddaughter, KM. When my father was looking at this letter, he said, it's interesting. He says, I called her milksop to her face. She's like not even a year old. Chester,
I
she
know.
doesn't know what you're saying to her. So, I said this to her face. And what did the baby say?
That's probably why he said it to her, because she wouldn't talk back or know what he was saying.
Right. And then we get Chester the apiarist again, to go to the apiary, the bees, which is interesting because a couple episodes ago in episode 25, we talked about how Lou and Sweetie had visited, and Lou goes out to the beehives with Chester in the surgical gown and is blowing a cigarette smoke at it. If you missed episode 25 when they moved to Kansas and this scene is happening, it says more about the bees. But we also start to see that Chester's becoming a little bit more of a farmer now. He's always been a naturalist, but now he's starting to keep things a bit more. He's expanding his hobbies. 120 pounds of the choicest sweet clover, as he says. So becoming quite a beekeeper. And I should note, there is a legacy of Demarees that have kept bees. And there's actually like a Demaree process from, I think it's like the early 1900s or late 1800s, that is still used today in the art of beekeeping. I'll have to do some special content about that at some point, the history of Demarees and bees. But for anybody that could be listening, if you're like hardcore, because I know there are some people that are really into beekeeping, and you're like, the Demaree process, yes, this is that Demaree line. This is that particular family line. So if you're into beekeeping and you've heard of the Demaree process that's still referenced today and that's in the history books of beekeeping, Chester is a part of that Demaree line. So yeah, we'll get into it at some point. Leave us comments if you want us to do some content about beekeeping and the Demaree legacy with doing that. But he's just joining the legacy at this point.
There are other things of interest. The Democratic Convention. It is commented on here that we had the best of it compared with Republicans, and I think that we did. I can hardly see that the Republicans have anything much as a campaign argument. They are hard put. I am disappointed that Vice President Wallace did not win out. It seemed to sacrifice the party harmony. It reflects nothing to the credit of the demos, but I believe that it will not weaken the vote this fall and may strengthen Roosevelt's determination to live a fourth term through. We hope that both of you will be able to vote for him.
Okay, and here we have to pause and talk about what's going on in the election of 1944, which again, so timely with today. When this will air, it'll be 9 days before the election. And if we look back to 1944, we see that Roosevelt's running for a historic fourth term in office in the middle of World War II. And there's a question about, would Roosevelt make it through a fourth term? He says it right here. It may strengthen Roosevelt's determination to live the fourth term through. The most interesting character, and I'm going to go into history major mode here, historian mode. The most interesting character here who is not mentioned is Harry Truman. And to give the context here of what's going on. So Henry Wallace was Roosevelt's vice president in that third term for the beginning of World War II. And by the time we get to the summer of 1944, the Democrats are going to make a choice to change the VP nominee for the 44 election. And Roosevelt, of course, was incumbent.
So back in this time, it was vice presidents were voted on.
Yeah, this went to rounds of voting. Yeah.
And so now they just are picked.
Right. Like we didn't see.
That's a big difference. That's a big difference that the convention was called to actually vote for the vice president, that Roosevelt did not have a choice in that matter.
Yeah. Now, actually, because I was at the Libertarian National Convention this past May, the public might not be aware of this. The Libertarians, we actually still nominate our VP. It's not just whoever they pick. Right. So I'm sure there's like an official endorsement or nod or vote. But this was very contested back then. There were a lot of people that liked Henry Wallace. But the problem with Henry Wallace was really they were concerned it would hurt the vote to not change things up. So they really narrow it down to two other contenders. And Harry Truman, the senator from Missouri, is going to be the one that is ultimately going to get this VP nomination. So when Chester writes here, I'm disappointed that Vice President Wallace did not win out. Chester really apparently likes Wallace, as many did. And it's interesting also that he's in Iowa, but the senator to the state from the South, from Missouri, is going to be the one that gets it. And that's Harry Truman. And we have to stop and we have to reflect on Harry Truman and what he's walking into here and the character of Harry Truman. So last year, my father and I, we went to Iowa, we went to Ottumwa, we went to Lacona, we went and saw Chester's grave, and then we continued on to Missouri. As I'd mentioned in previous episodes, we went to Union Station, to Kansas City, and right outside Kansas City is Independence, Missouri. And if you ever played the game Oregon Trail, you always start in Independence. That's the starting point of the Oregon Trail. It's also where Harry Truman's from. Isn't that great? He's from Independence, Missouri. Harry Truman is the only president in the 20th century that didn't go to college. He actually went to a business course and dropped out after a year taking typography and clerical studies. Hey, sweetie, I think you can run for president.
I was going to say, isn't that interesting?
That's what Sweetie did. Just really honest guy. What is it? I was listening to the Jocko podcast on the Civil War excursions. They were talking about Lincoln. Lincoln's like this too. That these guys had a PhD. They had a plain high school diploma. But he read. He was a voracious reader. In his presidential library, they've reproduced. They have his office with all of his books. He really studied. And he winds up in the Senate, I think in the United States Senate for Missouri in 1935. And there's all this, the idea of like the party bosses, and there's a huge history there that people can look into. But we get to 44, and Truman doesn't really have a relationship with Roosevelt. And Roosevelt's going to make this change. And so, kind of in a very strange way, Truman just gets the nomination because he's just liked. He's an honest guy, he's liked. And he wins this vice presidential nomination. And the person that describes this best, and I don't think there will ever be anyone else that does it better, is David McCullough, who I've talked about in early episodes of the podcast, that he was, and I had the honor of meeting him before he passed away, he was the preeminent American historian. All of his books are still in print, all the way back from when he started publishing. I think his first one came out in the 70s. They're just constantly renewed because they're this good. You can go to Barnes & Noble or whatever bookstore you like to go to. You will find David McCullough on the history shelf. You will find his Truman biography there. He won the Pulitzer for it. He won the Pulitzer twice. He's got 30 honorary degrees. But this is the Truman bio. It's a very large book. So anything you could possibly want to know about Harry Truman, David McCullough did the work for you in compiling the information. But he writes up a passage here of the first meeting on the White House lawn, because Roosevelt's the incumbent, of Harry Truman and Franklin Roosevelt. And I went to this section of the book. If you have the original, it's on page 324. Some people are really historians. They're going to want to get out their copy of the book. And Jamie, I wanted to take a moment to just read here the description of these two men meeting for the first time, because we're just so close and it's such a parallel. He writes, on Tuesday, August 18th, 1944. Notice the similarity of time, right? It's like within a month, 80 years later. On Tuesday, August 18th, 1944, in the shade of a magnolia tree said to have been planted by Andrew Jackson, Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman had lunch on the south lawn of the White House. Because of the heat, Roosevelt suggested they take off their jackets. So it was, in their shirt sleeves, seated at a small round table set with crystal and silver from the Coolidge years, that the two men posed together for photographers for the first time. In background, interest, personality, in everything from the sounds of their voices to the kind of company they enjoyed to the patterns of their careers, they could not have been much more dissimilar. Roosevelt was now in his 12th year in office. He had been president for so long and through such trying, stirring times that it seemed to many Americans, including the junior senator from Missouri, that he was virtually the presidency itself. His wealth, education, and social position he had known since boyhood were everything Harry Truman never had. Life and customs at the Roosevelt family estate on the upper Hudson River were as far removed from the Jackson County, Missouri, as some foreign land. Roosevelt fancied himself a farmer. To Truman, Roosevelt was the kind of farmer who had never pulled a weed, never known a debt, or crop failure, or a father's call to roll out of bed at 5:30 on a bitter cold morning. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, where he describes both men. Both men were of exceptional determination, with great reserves of personal courage and cheerfulness. They were alike, too, in their enjoyment of people. The human race, Truman once told a reporter, was an, quote, excellent outfit. Each had an active sense of humor and was inclined to be dubious of those who did not. But Roosevelt, who loved stories, loved also to laugh at his own, while Truman was more of a listener and laughed best when somebody else told a good one. Roosevelt enjoyed flattery. Truman was made uneasy by it. Roosevelt loved the subtleties of human relations. He was a master of the circuitous solution to problems, of the pleasing, if ambiguous, answer to difficult questions. He was sensitive to nuances in a way Harry Truman never was and never would be. Truman, with his rural Missouri background, and partly too because of the limits of his education, was inclined to see things in far simpler terms, as right or wrong, wise or foolish. He dealt little in abstractions. His answers to questions, even complicated questions, were nearly always direct and assured, plainly said, and followed often by conclusive, and that's all there is to it, an old Missouri expression, when in truth there may have been a great deal more to it. And also, I'd note here, just to pause here in a moment, the buck stops here. That's Harry Truman. So we get that famous quote. But back to the scene here of them sitting on the south lawn. He says, the lunch was sardines on toast. So I fast forwarded a little bit. The conversation dealt mainly with the campaign ahead and was not very private or revealing, since the president's daughter, Anna Roosevelt Bottinger, joined them. Truman would later repeat only one remark of Roosevelt's. The president told him not to travel by airplane because it was important that one of them stay alive. To his dismay, Truman noticed that Roosevelt's hand shook so badly he was unable to pour cream in his coffee. The president looked fine and ate a bigger lunch than I did, Truman told reporters afterward, already becoming party to the fiction of a steady hand at the helm. To Bess and Margaret, so Bess is Truman's wife, who were still in Independence, he described how Roosevelt had given him 2 roses, one for each of them. You should have seen your pa walking down Connecticut Avenue with his hat blown up by the wind, so he looked like a college boy, gray hair and all, and 2 rosebuds in hand. He wrote as if he hadn't a worry in the world. But arriving at his Senate office, he appeared noticeably upset. He was greatly concerned about the president. He told Harry Vaughn and described how Roosevelt's hand had trembled so pouring his cream in his coffee that he put more in the saucer than in the cup. His hands were shaking, and he talks with considerable difficulty. It doesn't seem to be any mental lapse of any kind, Truman said, but physically he's going to pieces. In September, Truman took Eddie McKim to a White House reception where McKim was so shocked by the president's appearance, he wondered if Roosevelt would live long enough to be inaugurated. If Henry Wallace might become president after all. On the way out, as they were walking through the gate, McKim told Truman to turn and look back, because that was where he would be living before too long. I'm afraid you're right, Eddie, Truman said, and it scares the hell out of me. And we'll leave it there. We'll resume.
Right,
David
there.
McCullough.
Right there. Okay,
we'll so
there. Obviously David McCullough has a very, he's able to look at people and make these assessments. But the fact that Truman noticed how Roosevelt was at the lunch and lied to the media about it.
To his personal acquaintances, to what he's talking about, here's a junior senator from Missouri looking at Roosevelt, who's shaking his hand so much, holding his coffee, that the milk is splashing out more in the saucer. And there's a realization to everybody there. Like, everybody just got it.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's not going to make it through a 4th term.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be the president. And he's the incumbent, and the country is with Roosevelt. This is probably going to be a landslide. Like, it was the middle of a war, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sentiment is with Roosevelt to reelect him. We know in the history books what happens here, but wow. Can you imagine sitting?
No. Well, actually, yeah, I can. I can imagine this scene playing out where the president is
not
clearly incapacitated in some level physically.
Yeah.
And that is not at all being shared with the American public, which is and I understand too that perhaps there was this need to you have to exude strength. We were in a war. We couldn't have the weakness, because when you have that, that's when you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
So, and that's not anything, but Truman went in and was able to assess this and see this right away.
He can see what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And his character as someone that's not like the best known person. They're just meeting. They're sitting there, and he's realizing very quickly, and as his friend says, this is going to be your place soon. And to have to do that, never having gone to college, and step up to lead the country at the end of World War II. The character of this president, no matter anyone's political affiliation today, this is a guy to study. And his story is really astounding. And Chester, at this moment, is saying, I really liked Wallace, the other guy. He doesn't mention Harry Truman's name in this letter.
No, he doesn't even mention him.
But he's going to come to appreciate Truman.
So with that, do you think that was a general sentiment across the country then, that Truman was not really known?
I think so. This is a rural guy, but also think of the connection to Chester here. The rural farmer from Missouri. Right? The simple, direct. This is going to be a guy that really resonates with Chester, and at the end of this episode, we'll have a special treat to show people just how much his opinion of how big his opinion of Truman is going to be at a future point. And I think
almost forgot. We're in the middle of a letter.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a letter, but like that reading, the McCullough, I can't do it any better. What is it? Blight says of Bruce Catton in the Civil War books. I can't do it. Yeah, we have to hear what McCullough has written. He's taught to these people directly, and he's painting this narrative. But we're putting ourselves back in the time of what's going on in that August and that heat of 1944, with a realization that this guy's going to be the president, and it scares the heck out of him.
Uncle Cyril thinks that he will be able to come out and see us this summer or fall. He may come soon or later after all the work is done. We are sorely restricted to travel. Last week, 2 or 3 men in this state pooled their gasoline coupons and their tires and went north to fish, and they had their gas rations cut for 90 days. The coming rationing, it now appears, will be even more strict. I feel especially privileged and cautious about doing anything but purposeful driving. Uncle Cyril will have to come on a train. When he comes, I will have to take his picture.
Yeah.
Okay, I hate that we're having to take another break, but oh my goodness. Okay, so we've talked about doing a ration episode, and
it's coming.
I think it is incredibly important that we do, because this makes me very upset. You can tell I am incredibly upset about this. So these men went and tried to do something fun.
They pulled it. They pulled
it. They didn't steal it. They didn't take more than they were allowed to be given. And then they were punished. They were punished for 90 days.
90 days, yeah. Not happening. Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. But, but this was allowed. This was okay to happen because we were in a war, and because I just feel that was an egregious, that just upsets me on a libertarian freedom level. Don't tell me what to do. That just upsets me.
Rations for the sake of the country, I get it during a wartime era then, but pooling rations, it's not like they didn't have the rations. They just pulled them together to be able to make it a trip. So things are getting more strict at this point. And he's like, only doctor visits, basically, is he going to use his car. That's basically where he is. We also get the mention here of Uncle Cyril. It's an interesting name of one of the uncles. So Uncle Cyril is Chester's brother. Uncle Cyril was a very dapper individual who apparently really liked his hats. And we'll hear more about Uncle Cyril as time goes on, with Sweetie's story. But that is one of Chester's brothers.
Bob, we think your literary productions are well worthwhile and hope that you will be able to afford us some more similar. I have always had the belief that you were capable of such production while you were in high school. Lewis was transferred to Kansas, and Sweetie felt she had to go, much against our advice of depending upon the military for any sense of security or permanence. Now it appears that Jalou will be sent away soon, and Sweetie, out of her good job, will have to find somewhere to work again.
Jalu.
Jalu, I know.
Jabil. Jalu. So.
Jabil and Jalu. Jabil is sister's husband.
Yep.
Right, Margaret.
Right.
And Lizzie. And I say this, and I do say this often when we come across things and try to like figure out who that is, because I get so confused with all these characters.
Yeah.
So it seems that the son-in-laws get that cute little nickname.
Yeah,
Jalu,
he's appending that prefix to it. So.
And we see the other side of the story here, because Sweetie knew that her parents were not happy that she was following Lou to Kansas, but we know that Sweetie said that she would not be able to live with herself if, well, I'm paraphrasing, but that she needed to be with her husband, because if he got shipped out, and that was the last time that she was able to see him.
Yep, she's not risking it. She said, "I'd go to Alaska if I had to."
Yeah,
I think
she's following that man anywhere.
Yeah, we're kind of fortunate that she's in Kansas, because the proximity of Iowa to Kansas at least is within a day's travel.
I've just discovered that I got the carbon paper in wrong, and the third copy of this letter will have to be mailed around to the rest of us here in the U.S. I'm going to add that if any of you have the opportunity to get a hold of a good chime clock movement cheap, send it on to me, or any other good sturdy clock movement for that matter, that is really worthwhile. I'm a little hard to please, though. Love, Papa. Don't know when we'll be in your town. Read this letter to Sister.
At the end of that letter, Chester has mentioned that he had the carbon paper in wrong. And when I was reading this letter in preparation, I saw that there was a special note saying that you had to like kind of figure this out, Allison.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up on screen what the problem was with the letter with the carbon that he's talking about. Chester, who is dealing with a lot of what's going on. And I'll put a picture of this also on the website for our audio listeners so you can see it. The way he feeds the carbon into the typewriter, it makes all of the letters and all of the phrases be a mirror image of what it should be. So all the letters are in reverse. They're all backwards. So the letter reads from right to left and all the letters are backwards. And when I came across this, he acknowledges that this has happened, of course. And if anybody's watching YouTube and trying to read this on the screen right now, good luck. There's ways to deal with this. The way you would deal with this back then is you would hold the letter up to a mirror and you could read the letter in the mirror, because the letters are then corrected. So when I was working with this one, I came across this page and I was like, come on, dude. What am I going to do with this? Because I was thinking, I was like, I gotta go get the mirror, and figure this out. Yeah. And I thought, wait a minute, technology.
Yes.
In the 21st century. So I took a picture of the letter and then I used the photo app to invert it so that I could read it the proper way and then transcribe it from there.
Very smart. Definitely, Allison, this is a very big project. And Allison comes across these little snags once in a while, and I just really wanted to call attention to this to let all of our listeners know, like, some of the stuff that she has to deal with all these letters. So, and thank her for all of her hard work.
I appreciate that, and it's interesting to share a little behind the scenes of working with some of these original documents. Certainly.
And it's always interesting to hear from Chester.
One other thing is the article from the Des Moines Register. This is, for those that wanted to see this, this is Alfred here. Here's the full information. It says, for our audio listeners, the heading is Soldier Killed in Dive into Creek, Lacona, Iowa, Private, First Class Alfred M. Wachter, 22, Hamilton Field, California, who arrived home on furlough Saturday, was killed Sunday afternoon in a diving accident on Wolf Creek, about 4 miles northeast of here. Private Wachter, his companion said, struck his head on a log when he dived into the creek where a group of young people was on an outing. Coroner C.H. Mitchell of Indianola said death was caused by a broken neck. Private Wachter is survived by his mother, Mrs. Barbara Wachter of Lacona, and a sister. So we get a lot more of the narrative of what happened here from Chester, but that's the coroner's report and what happened. So
he broke his neck.
And Chester
no amount of
still
CPR
tried.
would have brought it back from that.
2 hours. Still, Chester tried to save him, but That's how that happened. So just wanted to share that so people could see the article from the paperback from 44. And that was in the Des Moines Register on Monday, July 10th, 1944, on the 7th page of that paper for the citation.
It's always lovely to hear from Chester and to, see what's going on. But our other letters, we are catching up with Sweetie back in Kansas.
We are catching up with Sweetie. Hutchinson, Kansas, July 31st, 1944. Dear Jean, I asked Lou if he'd write to you and tell you just what he thought of your little problem. At first he said yes, but as time goes by and he has so little time, he said he was afraid he'd just better let me send his vote. He too says you must decide for yourself. He said he felt no pity for Bill, that it didn't seem to him that Bill was blind, and that there was no call for pity. He said that the fact that he was married didn't make the problem any simpler as far as telling you what to do is concerned. He said he couldn't write and tell you what to do. There he stopped, and it was a good many minutes before he said, I wouldn't advise that, would you? That is his opinion. Maybe I shouldn't tell you his last remark, for we both keep saying, it is her decision to make. You must not let your own decision be biased by other people's opinions. Let me tell you this, that if you think you love him enough to marry him now, you'll find in 2 months that you love him so much more, you'll wonder if you ever did love him when you married him. Letter number 5 arrived this morning. Your little story of the picnic and the banana split made me long to be with you. I could just hear you chatting, and I almost felt I should be able to chime in on your conversation. I guess I might be homesick. I dread to think of Lou having to leave, but should that time come, I believe I'll have to come to Des Moines and be with you. This is my own opinion, as yet unspoken to my lord and master. Govern yourself accordingly. I think we should take a pause here and just catch up our listeners on what's going on, especially if you've missed the last couple of episodes. So we find ourselves now in Hutchinson, Kansas. Lou's working at NAS Hutchinson. And there's a huge discussion going on with Jean having a new relationship with a blind attorney named Bill. And she's considering marrying this individual, and she's seeking out the advice of Sweetie and Lou. Now, if you missed episode 26, go back and listen to episode 26, because Sweetie's going to write a lot of what she's thinking. And now we get to get a little bit of Lou's input, but it's still, they keep stressing to Jean, this is your decision to make on your own.
And that's very important in any relationship that you're in, when you're asking these advice for people you obviously, she loves and trusts, what they would tell her. But she is the one that has to live the life. Right. Like, it's her life to live. It would be her consequences and her rewards. Like, these would all be occurrences for her. So they can't say you should do this, because you're not experiencing the same consequences that she would. And they both understand that. And I think that if she's questioning this so much, I would say no. Right. But I would tell her no, but both Sweetie and Lou understand. And I think she even says, I won't tell you what we think. Yeah. Because it's your life to live. I think they understand that the fact that she's saying this over and over again and kind of ruminating on it, that perhaps maybe it's not in the cards. Yeah. We got letters this AM. You, Mom, Lou's mom, Maida, Mary Keefe, and a card from Sister. I've got to answer them all and write to Bill Gruning. I can just about say it. Let me learn to spell it too. We did enjoy his letter and thought he did a darn nice job. It will take time to write a nice one in return. Your letters are nice, and I'm so amused at your style and quips. Maida's letter said Merlin Rickey of Packwood had been killed in action. I'm sorry. He might never have amounted to anything, but it is bringing the war and death nearer and nearer. She also said Uncle Cyril and Aunt Mary might come out to visit. Wouldn't that be fun? To have a family reunion and show off all the sons and daughters-in-law and all the grandchildren. I've got to quit now. Write 1 or 2 more letters and go eat.
write often. Love, Sweetie, and Lou.
Can you feel how much she misses her family through that letter?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, I know she misses all of them, and they've been writing a lot.
Yeah, that's good. She's getting some mail. We're not seeing the demand for letters. That's not going to go away. It's going to happen at times. But at this moment, and maybe it's because they sense she really needs that support because she's really far away from everybody. Yeah.
And her move was not something that Chester and Laura were supportive of.
No, not at all.
So I can see her like being a little sad and dealing with this. And then also we have the somebody that they knew died in the war.
Killed in action. So yeah, the unfortunate cost of war there. But we have one more short letter today. This is also from Sweetie in Hutchinson, Kansas, and this is coming in August 2nd. Hutchinson, Kansas, August 2nd, 1944. Dear Jean, tomorrow, August 3rd, makes 8 months since you and I tripped down the Corey stairway to meet L.S. and Joe Rusky. 8 months. Doesn't seem like it, does it? I'll bet dollars to donut holes that Lou forgets. He has to work till 10 tonight, but tomorrow is his day off. He'll no doubt take it pretty easy, and I can't blame him. According to the record down the street, yesterday's high was 108 degrees. Oh me, it sure seemed like it. We tried to go to bed, but the sheets burned us, and we couldn't sleep. I was still awake at 4:30. Lou tried to sleep, but he was so restless he just kept on the move all night. This morning is already so hot that my hair is wet on the back of my neck, and I'm perspiring very freely. I wrote a letter to Bill Gruning yesterday, but I didn't get it mailed. It will go out with this one. I hope it is okay. It took me a long time to write it, but wanted it to be fairly decent. Your comments, please. We got a letter from Lou's sister Elizabeth saying her vacation comes up in October. She's going to Texas to visit the other sister-in-law, come through Kansas to see us, and go to Chicago to see her cousin and on back home. She must be of the See America First Club. I wrote to Mom this AM. I should write a couple more letters, too. I want to get it all done so I won't have to worry about writing tomorrow when Lou is home. I've some hand-washing to do, too, so I'll cut this short now with the promise of another one and better one soon. Love, Sweetie, and Lou.
So Sweetie's getting into her routine in Kansas.
She is, as we head into August. And she's excited that she's getting to this little anniversary. So she's counting every third of every month from December 3rd to 43 as an anniversary. And she makes this little quip, which I think there's always been a lot of jokes about husbands forgetting anniversaries. Still, 8 months is kind of an unusual anniversary to focus in on. I don't know. Maybe, is it the first year? Jamie, when you were married, was the first year was every month like, oh, it's been a month, it's been 2 months from your experience?
Yeah, the first year is definitely like that. When they talk about the honeymoon period, the first year is that you're really celebrating everything. And
yeah.
We celebrate our anniversary when we got married, but we also celebrate the anniversary when we first started dating. So that actually is more, I don't want to say it's more important, but we didn't get married for like 5 years. Like we got engaged and we didn't get married until 5 years later. So that was a little different. Our first dating anniversary.
Yeah.
And like this is very, very important to her. And it's the first year. And also she's living in this time where her husband could be called away at any moment.
But then he's doing, I guess we would call it the typical guy kind of thing.
Yeah,
he probably doesn't even remember. It's fine. It's fine. So she's just griping to Jean about that.
Well, that she does say, she says tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
He's got a few hours.
Yeah, he can still remember.
That's weird. He might still remember.
Maybe he'll
surprise sweetheart.
Yeah, he is.
He's an absolute doll, so I'm sure. But this was a very intense episode with Chester's letter and everything that was going on there. And so Sweetie she's adjusting to like the Kansas heat and stuff. I was more focused on the things that Chester had said.
Oh yeah, the story from Chester here, just painting the scene of the time of what's going on, both in his immediate vicinity, and in the larger picture of things, to have that first mention of Harry Truman, which that's going to continue for some time. Chester's a Democrat, obviously. He's talking about the Democrat convention. Sweetie is as well. And at later points, they're actually going to, she's going to write to Jean and call him, did you hear Brother Truman on the radio? There's this thing where they're following the politics. She's very engaged with it, regardless if she finished college or not. And I wanted to close this episode with something really, really special. And it's a bit of a spoiler, but I'm going to leave out the date so it doesn't spoil too much. But I alluded earlier in the episode that as much as Chester was a fan of Wallace, of the other VP, he's going to come to really appreciate Harry Truman. So one of the things that we did when my father and I went to Independence, Missouri, and we went out, that's where the Truman Presidential Library is. It's astounding. If you're visiting out in that area, you have to go. You can go to Truman's home in Independence. The National Park Service has their free tour. Again, all these free tours, right? National Park Service. These historic sites are great. It's a combination in Independence, Missouri of the beginning point of the Oregon Trail, if you're into that history, as well as the Truman home, and you can tour the Truman home. So we went to Truman's home in Independence, Missouri, and then we continued on to I don't believe the Presidential Library is free, but he's actually buried there. Him and Bess are buried at the Presidential Library location, and there's the eternal flame, like there is for Kennedy if you were going to Arlington and all this. It's really something quite astounding, and I'm sure we can go through the pictures at some point once we get into the storyline more about Truman and things like that. But one thing my father and I did is we walked up to the desk and we asked to see if an archivist could come out, because we had in our possession 2 items. One was a letter that the secretary of the presidential office wrote in response to a letter that Chester had written to Truman when Truman was president. And she responded back, so we have that letter. And the second was a letter that Harry Truman, a very short letter, but authentically from Harry Truman, wrote to Chester himself in response to a letter that Chester had written. And we thought the most fitting thing was that this letter, the copies of both of these, including we still have the envelope from the one that was received for the second letter, that the copies of this become a part of the Truman Presidential Library collection. We thought Chester would have wanted that. And it's part of the historical archive, is the correspondences, for people to bring things over. So it took a little bit of time, but they did copy and put in their files there at the Truman Presidential Library these correspondences received back from the White House and back from Truman to Chester Demaree. So now Chester has joined the historical record, and I thought it was appropriate to mention this here. But also, we're on the eve of an election here ourselves. So taking away the date, because I don't want to give away some of the story, but I do want to share the content of what Harry Truman writes to Chester. And I'll share on the screen here the envelope so you can see Chester's address, which is fantastic.
I just love that this podcast is about Sweetie's letters, and this is a letter podcast. That's what this is.
Yeah.
Look at this.
That's the envelope. That's how it was addressed from how Harry Truman addressed it to him. Writing. Chester, we've seen this on some of the letters that we've gone through, that they have box number 5 in Lacona. It doesn't even say box 5. It just says, for our audio listeners, it's simply addressed to Chester, Mr. Chester Demaree, MD, Lacona, Iowa. That's it. The president knows this is going to get to Chester. That's all he needs to write. No zip code, no street number. This is not an interior envelope. This is what was mailed, and I can tell you that without showing you the whole envelope with the stamp. The postage mark, the postmark is on this envelope. So this just goes to Lacona. Lacona is a small enough town that it gets back to Chester. And then I'm going to bring up, and I'll put this on the website too. So this is what was a copy now exists in the Harry Truman Presidential Library. Harry Truman's going to write to Chester. This is the contents of that envelope. And he writes, for the audio listeners, your message in support of the Constitution of the United States and our free institutions is highly appreciated. Many thanks. Sincerely, Harry Truman. I have this framed hanging on my wall, this correspondence, the original, with the envelope. framed as well below it, saying to Chester and Lacona. So the note from Chester must have been something along the lines of encouragement and support for how Harry Truman would later govern the country. And Harry writes back, as the true man, the Constitution and our free institutions is the most important thing, clearly. One of the most important things to him. We are 9 days from an election, something to think about and ponder over are Truman's words to Chester. See you next week.